Hello, all you wonderful Authors Love Readers podcast listeners out there. I'm so happy that you're here. Before this episode starts, I want to talk a little bit about Patreon. And the first thing I want to say is we have a charter Patreon supporter, Linda D. I'm so excited that we have a Patreon supporter and that she was the one who broke the ice and started us. And amazingly, then we have two more supporters who came right behind her. We have Jennifer S. and Laura D. We hope more of you will join Lisa, Jennifer, and Laura in becoming a Patreon supporter of Authors Love Readers podcast. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm asking for your support of the podcast through Patreon donations. Let me tell you, it's really hard for me to ask. As my friends would tell you, I'm not good at asking for help at all. The reason that I set up for the Authors Love Readers podcast, it is not for me as an individual author. It's strictly for the podcast. I would love for the podcast to become self-supporting because I've been supporting it to this point. The expenses include having the podcasts edited, because you'll be surprised to know we talk longer than you actually listen. And I have a monthly fee for hosting the files because these are big files. And what I would love is to have people donate, a couple dollars a month would be terrific. $2 a month would be 50 cents an episode. It would be a sign of support and it would help defray some of these costs. So that would be the way I could keep the podcast going on. And I hope you'll consider that. Thank you.
I'm RJ Patterson, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest today is RJ Patterson, and we're probably going to geek out about journalism here at various points. We'll have to try to hold each other back a little bit. I met RJ through, everybody say it together, Novelists Inc. This is a recurring theme here, RJ. And he was also one of the people at the lunch table, which I've talked about with a couple other people here, where we figured we had an astronomically high body count at that table from our accumulated fiction. So tell the listeners, RJ, a little bit about what you write.
Well, I write, I kind of started out writing, everybody says, write what you know. So the first thing that I started writing about was, I thought would be fun, would be a sports journalist murder mystery series. So, and that's been my longest running series with Cal Murphy. And Cal takes on mysterious things that happen in the world of sports, usually the death of an athlete of some type or somebody related to the world of sports, and delves a little deeper. Most of the time it looks like an accident or an overdose or something like that, but never is as it seems. So that's kind of the series there that I got writing. Now, more recently, I started writing a little bit more action adventure thrillers, which are maybe a little bit, if you're, the audience is mostly murder mystery, may not like that as much, but I do get quite a bit of crossover from that, from the series that I started. And that one is called Brady Hawk. And it's kind of I would say more like a Jason Bourne type series. And then I have a few more that I've started. One of them is about, it's a more recent, well, I've written it more recently, but it's a 1960s Cold War thriller series, kind of a espionage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that one I did a lot of research in Washington at the National Archives and taken from actual CIA operational papers from the Cold War. So, but that one is Ed Maddux, the Ed Maddux series. So those are probably the better selling ones, the ones that the readers tend to like. I have a couple more, but those are the more popular ones.
And we have listeners and readers here from all genres. So it's widespread, and I think they'll be interested in a lot of those. That's great. Um, Now, when you started with the sports journalist sleuth, do you have people who read it who know you? And because RJ, tell us about your journalism background.
Yeah, well, I started out way back. Let's see, my first job was writing for a daily newspaper in 1989. At the age of 15, I wrote for a daily newspaper in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and really was I'd say that the paper was really desperate to hire me because I was awful. I look back and cringe at the stuff that I wrote, much like, sometimes you look back at the first books you wrote and go, gosh, I wrote that. But it was, but not quite as cringeworthy as the first articles I wrote. But I started there. I got, I really had, way back when I had my eyes on playing Major League Baseball. And when I couldn't throw a fastball more than 75 miles an hour, I kind of started looking for a different line of work. And my dad said, hey, you can get paid to watch sports. All you have to do is write about it. So my hero at the time was Louis Grizzard, and I kind of followed in his footsteps. I went to the University of Georgia. I actually read one of his books, If I Ever Get Back to Georgia, I'm going to Nail My Feet to the Ground. And I was doing the things that he did in the book. Like, I'm reading this book as I just read this chapter about him walking from Russell Hall, where I also lived, to the Athens Banner-Herald newspaper downtown in the rain. And I actually put the book down, walked outside in the rain to work just like he did. It was very surreal. But he was one of my favorites and kind of spurred me on. And of course, he's a great writer, or was a great writer and great humorist. But that was kind of where my background started from. And so, as you well know, in the world of sports, there are a lot of things that you see and hear that you don't necessarily write about for various reasons. And I thought it would be fun to unravel some of those things in fiction, or at least under the guise of fiction. So that's kind of how I got started in it a long time ago.
So how do the people who know you from the sports world respond to, do they read your mysteries, and how do they respond to that character and the stories?
Well, it's funny. I mean, some of the people in there, I mean, you have worked in a newsroom too. So there are interesting characters in the newsroom.
It's called an understatement.
Oh, yes, very much so. It attracts a wide variety of people, from the very fastidious to the sloppy to the, just dogged personalities. But it seems like there's always that same type of collection in every newsroom that you've ever been in. There's always somebody like that. So I do get, people who've read my stuff that work with me, they'll laugh. They're like, oh, I know who, this person is. She was the front desk person in this city, right? I'm like, yeah, you got it. Sometimes I don't say. I said, I'm going to plead the fifth on that one, on who that one is. But for the most part, people will see who they are. That one has a lot of, I guess, in the earlier novels in Cal Murphy, he's in a smaller town before he eventually goes to a bigger metro paper. And even from there, you see some of the bigger personalities, the bigger egos, which I'm sure working at some of the papers you worked at versus the smaller papers. There tends to be, the pecking order of who's the best, and I'm been around here the longest. I'm the veteran type of personalities there that kind of clash and make for a lot of interesting fodder, whether it be part of the story or just banter around the newsroom as somebody's pursuing a story. But for the most part, people, they think it's funny. They enjoy it, and I think that's one of the things that people, that know me, read the stories and go, is this related to this person or whoever, and try to figure it out.
I love it. I've had a couple where they thought it was like, they'll say, oh, that's person X, isn't it? In your book, and it's actually them. And they haven't recognized them, especially the more pointed portraits that never recognize themselves.
Yes.
So then from writing about a sports journalist, how did you and why did you make the addition? It's not a jump because you're still writing both series, but why the adding the more action adventure Was it a story, the idea that took you there, or did you always want to write that? How did that come about?
Well, I did want to write it. It's probably my favorite genre. I mean, if I look at the type of stories that I like, I think Jules Verne is probably somebody that really captured my attention from in my childhood days. My mother was a librarian, and so she would force me to read in the summer, where usually I wanted to be outside playing baseball or soccer or doing some sport. But she got me to read, and she would do it mostly by making me read sports books at first. I think that's what she thought I wanted to read. She made me read Bernard Malamud's The Natural. It was one of the first books I remember reading, which does not end like the movie, and crushed my little heart as a 12-year-old reading that story.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Right. But then, but those were, I think the things that really captured my attention were things like Jules Verne's, all of his books I read, and those are a little bit, I guess they're science fiction, but they're also a lot of adventure. Around the World in 80 Days, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I mean, there's a little bit of sci-fi element to them, but I felt like those were more like, the adventure. They're going on some big adventure. And then as I got a little older, I really started enjoying the Lee Child's Jack Reacher series at first, which was kind of the first thing I started reading after I got out of college and was able to stop reading textbooks. I was like, I can enjoy reading again. And so I guess there's a long journey, but those were the stories that I liked, and especially like the movies. I love James Bond. I love the Jason Bourne series. I like a lot of those, and the books too that go along with those as well. So that was kind of my pull away from like, oh, maybe I should try this. I was always hesitant to, but in my story, Brady Hawk is kind of he's a former assassin for the Navy SEALs, and so or special ops type of guy. And everybody says, write what you know. And I knew a lot of people that were writing these stories, and they had never been in the military. And I'm like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So I did what, probably as any good journalist would do. I started, creating a list of people that I knew that had actually done that. People who had done halo jumps and, jumped in the jungles and hunted down, people, these big drug lords in Colombia, and people who were in, Alaska and doing crazy things for the, special ops there for the Air Force. I mean, there were people all over that I met that I knew that did this stuff. So I said, why don't I just talk to them and, try to get their stories and try to get it as straight as I can, and incorporate them into the book. So that's kind of where I started and loved it and found a pretty quick following with that series.
And you said there is some crossover. Do you find it goes both ways? That readers of the action adventure will read the mystery and vice versa, or is it more one way?
Yeah, I find people will do both. I mean, they'll read both. I think some of my earlier readers they're pretty dedicated, and they'll read anything that I write at this point. So I'm pretty careful about making sure I can't write too crazy stuff, but I know that they'll follow over. I mean, it's just the stories are, I guess the way that I like to write. I like to tell the stories in a real straightforward, simple way, and so it's not too convoluted. I mean, the plots are I guess there's a lot of twists and turns within the plots, but it's pretty straightforward storytelling, and so it's real linear. So people like that. I don't jump around too much, timelines and giving you exact moments of each time and place where things are. I mean, it's a smooth story. Anyway, but I do. It's a fair amount of people that will read both. But I think my later people who've come, to find my stuff later on, are more action adventure people. And I don't know if that's a matter of who the book's been marketed to or who's just found me. But I think there's still a little bit of crossover. And
then from that to the third series, and so you can keep through all three series going.
Yes, that's the plan. I don't, I'll write. I don't write as often on the first series as I used to, but definitely Brady Hawk series is the one that has been far and away the best one. I'm actually got a spinoff plan for that one with one of the characters in the latest novel. It's going to have his own little series. But yeah, going to the next one. One of the other things that I love is history, and so. I started reading history, just about the CIA and the history of the CIA. And I have a friend that works in special, special collections, unit, I guess is what they call it, something like that, for the National Archives. And
Oh,
he'll call me whenever there's this, hey, I got this idea for a story, or, you should read this. Like, it hasn't
oh,
hit public
that's
yet, but you need to get
great.
up here and yes, get to Washington, come see this. So I've been to the archives a couple times, and now I kind of know my way around. It's a very, I don't know, it's a very difficult place to navigate if you don't know what you're doing or have the right people helping you. But this friend of mine was like, you need to look for this collection. And buried within all the Nazi war crime papers that are at the National Archives are actual CIA operational papers. So I started reading these, and I was like, this is amazing stuff. Like, the way that we recruited people and primarily a lot of it had to do with what was taking place in Bonn and how we were spying on the Russians in Germany at the time, when Bonn was kind of the capital or the center of the espionage world, and the embassies there, and what we were doing to trade secrets, or to find out secrets on each other. And so there were a lot of things in there. I mean, for example, I read a story where this guy was an agent, and it's kind of I guess the germination of the idea for Ed Maddux. But the way that the CIA recruited was they would get normal civilians that were being transferred over to work in someplace in Germany, kind of reconstruction of the war, or working with a multinational company. So I found this guy that worked for Ford, and his job was to recruit people. And he worked for Ford Motor Company, went to Bonn, and his job was to find people in this certain neighborhood. They placed him in a neighborhood where they knew there was this, so-called ambassador who was actually a KGB agent for the Russians. And this Ford Motor Company guy's job was to find out who who was cleaning his home, and who was, handling all the extra, peripheral stuff around his house. So the first thing he did, he finds the housewife, who was a great candidate. Her husband had died in the war. She was single, and they were offering to pay her quite a bit of money at the time. And just to say, hey, when we need you, we're going to ask you to do something. We need you to do it for us. And we're going to put this money in your bank account, and nobody's going to know about it. And so this went on for like 9 months. And then they said, okay, now's the time. So her job was to break her key off in the man's lock, and then at the KGB agent's lock. She breaks it off in the lock. He comes home. He calls the locksmith, the local locksmith, who also is on the CIA payroll. The locksmith comes out, fixes the lock, fixes the key for the man, and then in the back hands off a copy to the CIA. The next day they go in and bug the whole place. So there's things like that I thought were fascinating. So I was like, what if you took an average, everyday, character, a civilian, and who turned into this CIA agent, and what they did. And this is what was happening over there at the time. So that's where Ed Maddux comes from. And it's, it was so fun to research about the 60s Cold War era, what was important then, what they were wearing, what they were smoking, what they were drinking, what they were listening to, and have it all, historically accurate within the confines of these stories, taking place all across Europe. And I think probably the thing I'm most, I guess, on that series is probably the one I love the most. It's probably dearest to my heart, I guess, because I've spent a lot of time reading it. But I have another author friend of mine who's in her 70s who escaped from East Germany over the wall, and like maybe 3 months after they put it up, and she said she wanted to read one of my books, and I said, okay, you read this one, and she wrote me back and said, this is spot on. She's like, you've captured what it's like to be, even when the characters go to the Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, this is exactly what it's like over there. So I was pretty excited about that from somebody who'd actually been there and survived it, that, yeah, this is what it was like. So anyway, that was part of it. So if you like history and like those elements of history, you'll definitely like that series.
So when you have, I guess I'm wondering how you balance the series, and whether what you're writing next comes from trying to keep each series going, or do some story ideas come to you? Because one of the readers asks about how we get our ideas and what this reader has said is that she knows of authors who dream their stories and others who have, characters just kind of show up in their heads. And she's always curious about how each author, and very kindly says, gets ideas for our beautiful stories. So I'm curious too about how you get the ideas, and then whether that drives which series it's going to be in. Or whether
Yeah,
you
I mean,
start
I
thinking, I'm
think,
going to write this book. I'm going to write a book for this series next. And
yeah. Well, I usually I tried to, at least with my series, I've tried to get an arc with them, a story arc that goes beyond, and I guess I guess a more simplistic way of saying is that I try to write it like television, episodically. I don't; these aren't cliffhangers. It's not like you can't get a whole story out of it and go, what's going to happen? But there is about 10% of each novel in the Brady Hawk and the Ed Maddux series. I have a big arc that I scripted out a long time ago. Like, this is where the story is going and where it's going to end up. And so about 10% of it is that thread, and all the novels is a thread that strings them all together. So I guess from that perspective, I don't really, I've already come up with these stories, these ideas from a long time ago. And in order to make it fit, because it's fun to like bring back characters and like Brady Hawk, and you have a villain who gets away and he comes back 3 books later, and somebody that he's battling with and chasing down and that sort of thing.
So you already know what stories you're going to do for your whole series? She says in astonishment.
Yes. Yes. For most of them, I'll say at a point where if I get to, like, let's say book 10 or 12, and I've kind of wrapped up that arc and I feel like there's more, then I'll restart it. And that's kind of what's happened with Brady Hawk. There was I brought it to a logical conclusion on some level. But then, as I had mentioned to some of the readers that I might stop, and they were like, no, they're horrified. You can't stop Brady Hawk. I didn't kill him off. So I was like, okay, the way I can end this. And so I thought about it as the way that I had planned to end the series. I was like, oh, well, if I do this, I can, change the whole trajectory and start it off on another arc. So then I blast off into another direction on another arc that I planned out for that. So in that regard, I kind of keep it open, I guess, in my end, that I could change it if I wanted to, and keep going. But that's kind of my, at least my plan, how I want to do it.
I have an overall arc for my lead character in my Caught Dead in Wyoming series. And I'm looking at, but I'm kind of loosey-goosey about, 10 books, 12 books, something like that. And I know I want to bring her to a certain point. But I don't know the individual mysteries within I have one, the next one I'm starting on, and then the one after that, I kind of know a little bit. But I couldn't do it earlier because of what season it has to be in the, in fiction time. And,
right.
And I'm just astonished if you knew all your mysteries moving along.
Well, the mysteries are a little different, and those are, at least in Cal Murphy, there could be read as one-offs. You could read any one of those novels, and you're not missing a lot. I mean, there's Cal works with Kelly, who starts out in the first one, Kelly Mendoza, who's a photographer, and she's just as snoopy as he is, and they're the ones that kind of unravel this mystery in the small town. That kind of sets them on a journey and links them together. They kind of travel together, and there's some relational stuff that ends up happening with them, but that's not like, real, the essence of the story. It's just part of the relationship of these two characters. And there's a few other characters that appear in and out of that one, but that one is more of like, gosh, what can I do about this? I mean, some of them like I'll just say, like, I don't know. Like, I probably had 3 ideas when I first started, like, oh, I'm going to write these. But as I went along, I started looking around, like, there's one where I, in the world of sports, I was like, concussions, like, what if this was, this guy, did he really die of a concussion, or did he shoot himself, or did somebody shoot him to hide something, cover up something? I mean, all these things that I think of when I see stuff in the world of sports. I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, you read about some guy and, baseball player that goes to Venezuela for, the summer and he ends up dead, or not the winter, the winter, and he ends up dead. Like, what happened? I mean, there's all kinds of strange things. Baseball player from Cuba who comes to the United States, and are they all like Yasiel Puig, or are they? There's different stories. I mean, they all don't come over here and get paid $6 million right off the boat.
Yeah.
Figured literally speaking. Some of them come over and make $50,000 and never make it. And what happens to those guys? So, there's some of those stories that I have no idea of. So I guess the mystery side of things is a little different. And even on Brady Hawk and Ed Maddux, I have enough fodder for those, but not necessarily every detail mapped out. But like okay, they're going to steal they're going to be chasing guys across the continent trying to track down interballistic missiles, nuclear missiles, or something like that. That might be that'll be the background for the story. But that's kind of the idea that I have, and we'll flesh it out later.
So as long as we're talking about this, what then? How do you approach it from that idea? How do you take that to a complete book? What's your process?
Well, I'm not a pantser. I know they're the whole, are you a plotter or a pantser? I can't do that. I mean, at least for me, I've tried it before and it was awful and I scrapped it and just threw it away. I can't do this. So if I'm going to and at least for me, I like to have the smart twist, or, oh, I didn't see that coming, or, this was, I plot something, I plant an idea, far along, or way back in the day, and at the end, or in the novel, in the beginning and later in the novel, you see it come, this thing blossoms into, oh, that's where that came from, type of thing. So that's how I do things, but I have to plot it out. So I spend a long time, whatever, days, weeks, however long it takes me to plot out each chapter, and I write a summary on each one. So I think there's some different methods, but I guess you would say it's the writing terminology. There's a guy coined the phrase the snowflake method, where you start with here's the tagline. Basically, if you were writing one line on the back of the the novel, and then you write the description of, basically, here's the 2-3 paragraphs what the novel's about, and then you start expand on that. And usually those documents are anywhere from 10 to 12,000 words for me. That kind of tells me what's going to be happening in each book. It's a lot of work, but that's how I like to do it and make sure it's tight.
Is that how you wrote it for journalism too?
No. Journalism is it's completely different. At least for me, it's a completely different style of writing. And I still do that now. I cover, different things for, various outlets and, events around, but it's more of when I'm writing those, I'm thinking of the story, like, what am I doing? And a lot of that, a lot of stuff that I do is game coverage. So that's your super pantser mode. I mean, you'd think that I could be able to thrive in that, where you have, 30 minutes to write 600 words on deadline, and with quotes, and everything better be tight and right. And you're handing off to an editor in New York who's going to be crawling down your throat if you get it wrong. And so that's, for me, that's a totally different thing. I'm sitting there watching a game and I'm thinking, what's the story? I covered the Mountain West championship game on recently, and it was like I didn't know who was going to win, and I wasn't sure. The game went to overtime, and I had basically had 2 full stories written, just because I got to have something. And even then, I wasn't even sure what I was really going to write about. And it wasn't until after the game that I went to the press conference that I actually figured out, oh, that's the story. I didn't, this is where I want to go with it. And so it was, that's one method. But none of those techniques. The only technique, I guess, that I borrow from my journalism days is the fact that I can write fast. And other than that, it is just like, there's nothing else that transferred for me. I mean, dialogue a little bit.
Dialogue's a big one for me. I really think it hones your ear for dialogue. It's a great background. And I think sports is a terrific background because there's so much intrinsic drama, conflict. There's conflict in every sports event because the competitor is either in conflict with other competitors, or for sure in conflict with himself of how they perform.
Absolutely. I think it is a great microcosm for a lot of things. I mean, and you get it all in 2-3 hours, depending on what sport you're watching, and get to watch it unfold. And it's good. I mean, and I can't stop myself when I'm watching a game. I'm always thinking about, oh, this is the story. This is what I would write about. So.
Did you or do you now have to do what we used to call B matter? So you would do the like running on the first half, and then say on a football game, and then top it with a lead at the end of the event, and then do a write through when you had a chance to actually do a real story. Were you doing any of that on off the cuff?
Well, the Associated Press is who I do a lot of my stuff for right now, and they don't do that anymore because everybody gets the speed at which you get your information is, people want to find out about the game is so fast. Most people have watched it, or they're on ESPN or whatever their favorite sports app, and they've seen the highlights already. So they don't need a play-by-play type thing. So the running story thing, they don't even really want that. So a lot of my stories are, I actually have a section where the takeaway that I write, if you read into the AP stories on college football or any college sports game, even NFL, I think they do this for NFL games. It is where you get to kind of editorialize now. What do you see happening as a result of this outcome, whether it be a player or a team or whatever. So it's really different. But then you do get to, the write through is still there where it's the more, in-depth story where you're getting behind the scenes of something and sharing that. So that's still there, but, and goes out, but immediately the what they call news now is what the AP really pumps out to all of these outlets, these news outlets and websites that you have to have 5 minutes after the game. And it's not a running story. It's kind of a overall general, here's what happened type of thing.
That's interesting.
What the highlights
were. It was such
were.
a particular skill. And I knew a couple of people, really surprising people. David Remnick, who's now the editor of the New Yorker. I think that's right. He was really good at that. And I think he only did it one season with the NBA, but his running stories were really good. Very peculiar little skill. Okay.
Yes.
We've sort of talked about, one of my questions is surprising job you've held. Have you had different surprising jobs beyond sports writing?
Yes. Let's see. Probably I was trying to think about this. The more surprising, would it be more surprising that I worked on the midnight shift at Walmart, or that I was a cotton scout in South Carolina when I was a teenager?
So you got to explain what a cotton scout is.
Yes, cotton scouting is fabulous. It was it's probably the best job you get as a teenage boy, I would guess. Imagine if you like riding motorcycles and getting a tan and getting paid lots of money. I mean, it's really great, and you only work 4 days a week. But what you do is you would ride through a farmer's field, and depending on the size of the field, you would check 4 or 5, maybe 8 spots, and get what you would call a count on a number of plants. You count up to 100 plants and figure out how many percentage of thrips, aphids, bollworms, boll weevils are pretty much eradicated. You very rarely see those, but army worms, there are all kinds of different worms and other bugs that could damage the crop. And then when you reach a certain threshold, you'd fill out a report, and reach a threshold, it would let the farmer know when to spray, which saved them money and saved the environment. So it was a really cool job. And you made a lot of money doing it, just riding a motorcycle most of the day. So it was great.
Is that still a job out there now, or has technology taken that over somehow?
No, I think there's still people doing it. I was just home for my high school reunion last summer. And there are people I know that were still doing it, still have that job. I mean, if you were running a good cotton scouting crew, even this was 25 plus 30 years ago, you could make, I think those guys were making 6 figures back then, clearing 6 figures, just working in the summer.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a great gig. And I mean, it still saved the farmers tons of money. So they're more than happy to pay for it. Because if not, then they don't know when to spray, and that's really costly. Or if you wait too late, it can cost them, quite a bit of yield on their crop.
So what were downsides of the job?
Well, you had to get up early, which I know some teenagers didn't like that.
You just lost me. Okay.
Well, you had to get, we usually were leaving at 6:00. So I usually got up about 5:30, but we were done by 3. So, it wasn't that bad. So I mean, I guess that's, if you were a teenager who didn't like that stuff, you could do, didn't like to get up early, and you wanted to go to the pool all the time, but there's still plenty of time for that after work. But that was the only downside, I guess, for me. Sometimes having to sit in the back of the truck if you drew the short straw on a long trip in the morning, that was never fun. But it's never that. Those are very small inconveniences to how much you made and how much fun you had.
Have you ever written anything with that as a background? You got to use that someplace.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I probably one of the best stories that I worked for while we were scouting this farmer's field. We stumbled across a bunch of marijuana he was growing.
Yeah.
And I was like, reported this, and you actually, you would get money from, I don't know who it was. Somebody would pay you if you found this stuff out. But I was like really interested in I was like, this is cool. And that guy went to jail. I mean, it was like a big deal. And we were scouting his fields, and all the time, all of a sudden we're like, nope, we're not going there again. I'm like, why not? He's in jail. Like, we're done. We're moving on. So, so I guess there's some things like that I thought, well, that could be interesting. I mean, similar to, I don't know if you saw Bates Motel or you watched any of that, but that was it reminded me, there's some, drug growing that takes place in Oregon somewhere, but it reminded me of the drug growing culture and all around it that you'd sometimes stumble upon by accident out in these places. But yeah, I mean, I think at some point I'd like to. I mean, I think probably one of my favorite, most underrated John Grisham novels is A Painted House. I love that book, but I think it maybe because it harkened back to my time, when I was, working on the farm like that and being around those people, and just a lot of the rich subtext or, cultures that you find within the farm life, from different races and different backgrounds and ages, and people who've been there forever and new blood coming in the farm. I mean, it's really interesting, but it's totally out of the realm of what I'm doing. At some point, I am going to do something on it. I've had several people ask me, when are you going to write about, life on the farm in the low country and write a good mystery novel on it? And so if I can ever come up with the right time to do it and just want to write a one-off novel, I will do it one day.
Well, and you're talking about those hidden areas and kind of, when I worked at the Charlotte Observer for a while, and one of the things I remember is going up into the mountains, which I just love. The Blue Ridge Mountains are gorgeous, and North Carolina, it's really, really pretty. And meeting people who had never been out of their county. Never out of their county. And some of them were fascinating. They lived this very, very closed in life, but very deep life, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I want to jump now to a question that it's usually I ask much later, but I want to ask it right now. A reader had this really interesting question of, if you could write a book with any other author, a living or dead, who would it be and why?
That is a good question. I don't know, maybe everybody would say this, but I'd want to write one with probably Harper Lee. And I mean, Tequila Mockingbird is one of my favorites. And I don't know if it's just a byproduct of growing up in a small town in the South and living in a place, where I grew up in Orangeburg. It's, there was the Orangeburg Massacre there. When I grew up there, there were these, this happened it happened before my time, before we moved there. But in the late 60s, there were 3 South Carolina State students, and South Carolina State is a historically Black college and university. And there was these guys wanted to go and bowl at this bowling alley that's literally across the tracks from the university. And the owner wouldn't let them do it. And it ended up in these riots. And before long, the police, state troopers shot 3 students. And that very well. And he was, especially as a sports writer there, the Smith, Hammond, Middleton, those were the names of the 3 gentlemen who were shot. And that's the name of their basketball arena. And so, for me, there was always that, I don't know, like I grew up with it. There was a lot of racial tension, but in the world of sports, on the sports fields, there wasn't anything like that, like I don't ever remember there being this huge tension when I was playing ball growing up. Like, whether somebody was black or white, we didn't care. Like, it was just, that guy can hit home runs. He can strike people out. And then even then, or he makes me laugh. Like, I don't, he's terrible, but he's hilarious. Like, we love having this guy on the team. And it didn't matter what color they were. And it was just the way that it was. And so while we knew that there was that stuff going on, like our parents, you would hear stuff about that, racial tension within the town and different things. The kids, it was different, my dad was a pastor in this town, and a pastor from one of the larger African-American churches lived right down the street from us. And we lived in the same neighborhood, and he and I made a rap little album together, just having fun one day, and used to play basketball together. And I was a Celtics, he was a Lakers. I mean, draw from that what you want, but it was the kind of thing that, we I don't know, we just had fun with it. And we're just friends. And it was never, I don't know, there was never any talk about it. It never felt weird or different, or, he'd come and eat at my house and I'd eat at his, and we'd hang out together all the time. So I don't know. It was just, so there's something about that. And I think that Tequila Mockingbird, when I read it, I was like, really resonated deep within me as far as like, how people, misconstrue who people are. And that can be not necessarily, doesn't even necessarily have to be color. It can be, just a personality, or you don't think that person is worth much, or you think they should be dismissed for whatever reason because of how they look or how they act or how they think. They're different than you. And I think that's a universal message that probably we need more than ever now, so it would be fun to write a story with her on something like that, and I don't know if it's just that story, just resonates so deeply with me. And I don't know if I'll ever write something like that one day, but I really would. I mean, that kind of stuff is penetrating to, with readers, and really, it can bring about change just by reading fiction.
It would be wonderful to have another story from her too, that.
Yes.
But that's a fascinating answer. I was curious because there are a number of people that came to mind for me who I thought you might be interested in. And that's a great one. Okay. Now we get to do the rapid fire either ors. Okay. You ready?
All right, let's do it.
Here we go. Binge watch or make the watching last as long as possible?
Binge watch.
Jigsaw puzzle or crossword puzzle?
Crossword puzzle.
Sailboat or motorboat?
Motorboat.
Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
Daisies or roses?
Roses.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Hot air balloon.
House decorating or gardening?
Ooh, neither one. Okay.
Gardening.
I have to go with gardening. I know it's either or. Gardening.
Paper plates or best china?
Paper plates.
Mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Day or night?
Night.
Opera or show tunes?
Show tunes.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Hiking boots.
Pickup or sports car?
Sports car.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
You said appetizer. I'm going to give you dessert anyhow. Ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Cruising or trekking vacation?
Cruising or trucking?
Trekking.
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 Definitely trekking.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Mustard or ketchup?
Ketchup.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Summer.
And this is the last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Save the best for last. Those are good.
This has been a lot of fun, RJ. I hope that the listeners have gotten to know you a lot better. And we'll come back next week to meet another author or have another episode of Authors Love Readers podcast. And we will have all the information about RJ in the show notes. So in the meantime, have a great week of reading.
Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.